Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Madison, and the focus is the party of the opposition. The year is 1789. The Constitution has been confirmed, it's been ratified, it's in place, the government is up and running. George Washington is the president. James Madison finds himself in the House of Representatives. They're very much aligned. Madison helps Washington write his inaugural address. He also helps convince his friend Thomas Jefferson to sign on as Secretary of State. All is harmonious. But not for long. Now, Madison had gone into the Constitutional Convention as a major catalyst for change for a stronger central government to counteract the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, which had been up and running for several years before this big change with this new Constitution. Well, Madison now begins to change, and he is aligned with Jefferson, and they feel that the government is getting too centralized almost from the very beginning. And over the next decade, this party of the opposition, Jefferson and Madison, really drive to stand up to counteract this centralizing force under the Federalists that had really been put into power at the beginning of the constitutional republic era. Let's talk about some of these examples, and we'll begin with Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury. He wants to have what's called the Assumption Bill, where the federal government would assume the debts of the individual states. Why? Because it would enhance the creditworthiness of the country as a whole. Now again, Madison went into the Constitutional Convention wanting a more forceful economic policy from the central government, but he and Jefferson are very much opposed to the Assumption Bill. So what do? In this case, they compromise. Jefferson and Hamilton meet on the street. They agree to have dinner at Jefferson's house. Madison comes along and they work out an agreement where Jefferson and Madison will support the Assumption Bill if Hamilton will support their desire to have the site of the Capitol located in the South, actually on the Potomac River between Virginia and Maryland. Compromise is worked out, both measures pass, and almost immediately Jefferson and Madison have buyer's remorse. They don't like the deal, they don't like the compromise, and they're not interested in compromising, frankly, ever again. The next opportunity for debate, Hamilton again, the economic plan. He wants to establish a national bank. Now in this case, it's bad policy and unconstitutional. That's according to Madison and Jefferson. They think it's, again, too much central authority, and there's nothing in the Constitution that says the government, the federal government, can establish a corporation of any kind, let alone a bank. Madison says at the time, the essential characteristics of the government as composed of limited and enumerated powers would be destroyed by this onset of a national bank, in part because of the justification in the Constitution being that very broad, necessary, and proper clause. Well, in Federalist 44, Madison had talked about the necessary and proper clause, and he had a very different take. At the time, he said, whenever the end is required, the means are authorized. Wherever a general power to do a thing is given, every particular power necessary for doing it is included. Very broad authority, according to Madison in Federalist 44. Come forward just a couple of years, and now he says if implications, thus remote and thus multiplied, can be linked together, a chain may be formed that will reach every object of legislation, every object within the whole compass of political economy. Necessary and proper would mean they could do whatever they want, which is kind of what he implied in Federalist 44. Not so now. So very much against this national bank, but it goes through Congress, it passes, George Washington aligns with Hamilton, the bank goes into effect, Jefferson and Madison are distraught. So what do? They take a vacation. George Washington actually takes a tour of the South, they take break, Congress is adjourned, and Jefferson and Madison head north for a real vacation. They spend a month in the New England and New York area in particular, and ostensibly to check out the Hessian fly, which is devastating the wheat crops in the north, which is actually something that Jefferson in particular was interested in, and for health and other refreshing reasons, they go and have a lovely vacation. But that's not all. They take a bunch of meetings. They start meeting with anti-federalists, those leading New Yorkers who are also now very concerned about the direction of the country under Washington and Hamilton sort of consolidating power. They meet with Robert Livingston. They meet with Aaron Burr. They meet with the governor, George Clinton. And despite differences between these folks, again, the Virginians and the New Yorkers, on a number of topics, they start to become aligned. And they become aligned really the beginning of the Democratic-Republican Party, the party of the opposition to those in power right now, because they realize that even though they have some differences, their common goal to actually arrest the movement of concentration of power from the Federalists and return liberty to the people and sovereignty to the states, that overcomes their individual differences. And the only way that they're going to change things is by getting elected, because that's how you get power. And to do that, they need to be aligned from across the country. Now, this is a really interesting turn of events because James Madison had predicted the exact opposite in the Federalist Papers. In his first essay in Federalist 10, he put forth this idea of extending the sphere. And in a large republic, you wouldn't have dominant political parties because you'd have so many disparate interests, they'd effectively cancel each other out and no one would dominate. But where he was wrong, and he's already realizing, is that's not a path to power. In the United States, where you have winner-take-all elections at the congressional level and at the presidential level, this consolidation of interests, even though that there are differences, is the only way to really get power. And Madison and Jefferson are beginning that process on this vacation in New York with some of these meetings to start down the path of establishing the party of the opposition. They also recognized another important power, the press. A press organ, to have someone out there writing on your behalf and criticizing the opposition. They meet with Philip Freneau when they're in New York, and they convince Freneau to join the State Department as a translator working for Jefferson. But that's really just part of the reason. They bring him to Washington to stand up a newspaper. It's called the National Gazette. And they are his champions for Freneau to go out and take it to the administration, to Washington, to Hamilton, to the Federalists. And that's exactly what happens. So they're finding that the power of the press really can obviously make a difference. So let's fast forward into Washington's second term. Jefferson actually resigns his cabinet post. It kind of leaves Madison as the leader of the opposition in Washington. Jefferson's still really the leader of the opposition overall. And they have another major showdown with the administration. Washington is concerned about both France and Britain. They're at war with each other, and they're both taking it out on American shipping that might be going to their enemy. Washington sends John Jay, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, to Britain to try to strike a deal, to get them to stop doing this. And he comes back with what's called the Jay Treaty, and most people aren't very happy with it. And Madison and Jefferson are really unhappy with it because they think it's a complete sellout of the Anglo-men to the Brits. They didn't get anything that they wanted, like British to stop impressing sailors into their navy. They didn't get any return or compensation for escaped slaves from the Revolution. That's what the South wanted. They got a few economic concessions in this deal, but it avoided war, so Washington put it forward and it passes the Senate by a single vote. Well, Madison is up in arms in the House of Representatives, and he goes to take on President Washington basically directly. He says that even though the Constitution says only the Senate has the authority for advice and consent of a treaty, the House also has jurisdiction. Why? Because they have the ability to start appropriations bills, and any treaty needs an appropriation, so therefore the House can demand copies of all the documents that the administration has surrounding the Jay Treaty. And he puts that request into the administration, and George Washington says no. He says no, mainly because he says, look, I was at the Constitutional Convention too. In fact, I was the president of the Constitutional Convention, and I remember really clearly the House has no role in the treaty-making process. So you can ask for documents all you want, Mr. Madison, but I'm not going to send it because that would be an unconstitutional and impermissible encroachment of power on behalf of the House and put separation of powers at risk. Well, this was a very public defeat for James Madison, but he wouldn't give up. He actually goes on to make a really incredible claim. He says, whatever veneration might be entertained for the body of men who formed our Constitution, the sense of that body could never be regarded as the oracular guide. The Constitution was nothing more than the draft of a plan, but a dead letter until life and validity were breathed into it by the voice of the people. And by that last part, he meant the Ratifying Convention. So this is a complete about face for James Madison. In the Ratification Convention in Virginia, he was adamant that you either accept the Constitution as is, word for word, and you can amend it later, or it's a rejection. Now he's saying that the mere mention of ideas at the Ratification Convention, somehow there in Virginia or elsewhere, actually has power over the overall Constitution. And in this case, since in Virginia they said the House of Representatives should have a role in treaty-making process, then he has the right to these documents from the president. This is a complete about-face in terms of going away from the words of the Constitution into this much more nebulous concept of the state ratification conventions actually having some power and authority. But Madison wanted to get his way, and this is how he intellectualized going in the opposite direction. Well, he doesn't win out in this case, and eventually he leaves the House in 1797. After 8 years, he's pretty distraught. Now, John Adams, a Federalist in his mind, has won the presidency, at least Federalist leaning. Jefferson comes back to Washington as the vice president because he finishes second in the overall vote. Madison goes home. They're still trying to build, though, this party of the opposition so they can get into power. The next step comes along in an area where Adams is really being pressured to go to war with France. War is off the table with Britain thanks to the Jay Treaty, but now war with France is very much being pushed. And there's also a very strong push to curtail dissent in the country. The Congress passes two laws, the Alien Act and the Sedition Act, that would actually give the federal government the authority to kick out any aliens that the president felt was putting the country at risk. No judicial oversight of that at all, completely monarchical. And then the Sedition Act. Anyone caught saying or writing anything really against the Congress or the president could be arrested and put in jail. The Sedition Act. Well, Jefferson and Madison are up in arms. This is monarchical, it's unconstitutional, totally violation of the Bill of Rights and Madison's own First Amendment. But what do you do? There was no judicial review yet in the United States. This idea that the Supreme Court could declare laws unconstitutional, it's not in the Constitution and it had never been exercised to date. That would be a few years later. So what happens? Jefferson and Madison come together and say that the country is based on a compact between the states and the federal government. And if either side violates the compact, then the other side can actually declare that violation to be null and void. This is the concept of nullification, and Jefferson takes the first shot in authoring something called the Kentucky Resolution. And in the Kentucky Resolution, he basically says if a state finds a federal action to be unconstitutional, it can nullify it and make it null and void within its own borders. Jefferson then pushes Madison to do something similar in Virginia, and in fact, Madison chimes in. He writes in his Virginia resolution, in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are in duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the evil and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them. To interpose, this was the word he chose. And some historians have felt that that was sort of less severe than nullification, but it's really a distinction without a difference. He's saying it's null and void within their state. And this was, again, a complete reversal for James Madison. James Madison, one of the things he was so strongly in favor of that didn't get into the Constitution was the idea of a national veto for the federal legislature to be able to veto laws passed by the state. Now, this was, again, rejected at the Constitutional Convention, but Madison was very much in favor of it. Now he's completely turned it around. He's saying that the states can nullify, or in essence have veto, over a federal law, in particular, based on their interpretation of the Constitution. Madison had written in Federalist 44 that without federal supremacy, it would have seen the authority of the whole society everywhere subordinate to the authority of the parts. It would have seen a monster in which the head was under the direction of the members. Again, it was all about the authority of the federal government, not the states. Now what is he saying in the Virginia Resolution? So as to consolidate the states by degrees into one sovereignty, the obvious tendency and inevitable consequence of which would be to transform the present republican system of the United States into an absolute or a best mixed monarchy. Complete reversal on behalf of James Madison, as now he is for states' rights and the state authority, in essence, to declare a federal law unconstitutional. Now, in this case, it doesn't go very far because no other states beyond Virginia and Kentucky actually sign on, so there is no nullification at the time. But it set a precedent that others would definitely pay attention to in the future in other nullification crises in the future that Jefferson and Madison had sort of paved the way for. What they'd also paved the way for, though, was the ascendancy of the Democratic-Republican Party, the opposition party. Because by the end of the 1790s, as we're getting into the 19th century, the country was really ready for a change, and this new party had a lot to do with it. But that is the story for another day. That is James Madison and Party of the Opposition from the life of James Madison. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.